All right, let's dive deeper into this passage this morning. Here's the first thing that Jesus communicates to us in Matthew chapter 5. Take a look at this, which is to take your sin seriously. In other words, recognize that sin is something that needs to be addressed. And notice here in this passage, Jesus is really challenging his listeners to expand their understanding of sin. For example, it's almost like Jesus is anticipating some hypothetical person who comes up to him and say, "Hey, Jesus, I've kept the sixth commandment my entire life. I have never committed adultery against my spouse." And Jesus is saying, "Oh, really? Well, that's interesting. Let me ask you this. If you ever walked around somewhere and you saw a beautiful woman or a handsome man, have you ever thought about what could be between you and that person? Or you ever been flipping through a magazine, or have you ever watched something on TV? You ever looked at some stuff on the computer, or you ever scrolled through your phone or daydreamed about a coworker or a neighbor?" Because what I'm hearing you say is that you've never physically committed adultery. But what I'm saying that you need to hear is that if you've ever thought about somebody other than your spouse in a lustful way, you have committed adultery in your heart. You know, in our liturgy, we say that we have sinned against God in thought, word, and deed. In other words, we don't just sin by what we do, we also sin by what we say, and we also sin by what we think. And so what Jesus is doing in here is he's challenging us to take our sin seriously, to recognize and understand that a lot of the things that we do are actually sinful, and we need to see that. We need to recognize that. Ultimately, we need to be able to address that. But you know what? Let me ask you this. Does our American culture today, does it take sin seriously? Like, does our American culture identify sin for what it is and call us to repent and turn from our sin? You know, if you think about it, we live in a culture today that has no problem creating opportunities for us to sin. For example, why is it that practically every show today is filled with nudity and sex scenes? And every fifth word is a cuss word, and all the characters are cheating and backstabbing and lying and stealing? I mean, seriously, if looking at somebody lustfully is causing us to commit adultery in our heart, why is our culture putting out shows like that? And the harder question is, why are we watching them? You know, it seems like almost every Sunday I'm ragging on Hallmark Channel movies, and so I can't believe that I'm about to say this. I'll say it. One of the great things about Hallmark Channel movies, you know this, is that you don't have to worry about all of this cursing and violence and graphic sexual content. And from that perspective, I totally understand why so many of you watch them, right? Because there's so much content out there today that can so easily lead us into sin. And at least with Hallmark Channel movies, by and large, for the most part, they kind of stay in that safe area. Now, with that being said, I need you to forget that I ever said anything positive about Hallmark Channel movies, because I'll never hear the end of it, right? But see, these are the things that we need to grapple with, right? We need to be honest with ourselves and look at our lives and recognize that we live in a culture that allows our sin, that encourages our sin, and in some sense even celebrates our sin. And friends, we can either continue to buy into this casual approach to sin, or as Jesus is pointing out here, we can take our sin seriously. You know, if you think about it, God, He takes our sin very, very seriously. In fact, He takes it so seriously that He was willing to die for our sin. Jesus, God in the flesh, was willing to give up His very life so that you and I would not be held captive by our sin. That's how seriously He takes it. And so, friends, here's my first question that I really want to encourage you to wrestle with this morning. Take a look. Is there sin in your life that you're not taking seriously? In other words, is there something you're thinking or something you're saying or something you're doing that you know you shouldn't be thinking or saying or doing, but you are? You know what? Maybe you've convinced yourself that it's not that big of a deal. Maybe you convince yourself that everybody else is doing it so that it's okay for you to do it too. Maybe you've convinced yourself that whatever it is you're thinking or saying or doing is not even a sin at all. In fact, that's what Jesus is really calling out here in Matthew chapter 5. Hey, the hypothetical person is saying, hey, I'm not committing adultery. And Jesus is saying, no, actually, you probably are. Friends, is there sin in your life that you're not taking seriously? Remember, this is not to condemn us. This is to inform us and equip us to really tackle with what Jesus is talking about here.